I'll never forget the night I found out everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty could be flipped upside down in a single, gut-wrenching moment. It was July 2010, a Friday night in downtown Chicago, and I was sitting on the edge of our threadbare couch, staring at the flickering glow of my laptop screen. The hum of the city seeped through the cracked window, a mix of distant sirens, the low roar of buses, and the occasional shout from someone walking too late. I remember thinking how alien this city felt, how every street corner and every brick building seemed to be conspiring to remind me that I had no roots here, no friends to anchor me, nothing familiar except this small, rented apartment and the fading scent of takeout from the Thai place downstairs. I was 25, fresh out of a move from a small Midwestern town. I barely wanted to leave, but somehow couldn't resist. My life had become a carousel of odd jobs, bartending at nights, temp work during the day, weekends spent delivering packages, or doing freelance graphic design. I was lonely, craving connection, any sort of human touch that reminded me life had meaning beyond the gray walls of my apartment. That's when I met Jennifer. Jennifer was 22 years younger than me, but she had a presence that made it feel like she carried the sun with her wherever she went. We met at a college meetup, of all places, a small art exhibit downtown where she was sketching in a corner and I was trying not to embarrass myself in front of strangers. I remember thinking, who is this tiny whirlwind of energy with the messy hair and giant sketchbook? She smiled at me in that way that made it impossible not to approach her, and somehow, by some miracle of timing and mutual awkwardness, we started talking. Her family, however, made every interaction a challenge. She was mixed race, her mother pale as a ghost, her father darker, a man with an intensity in his eyes that unnerved me the first time I met him. Her mother had married someone like me, but that didn't stop her from looking at me as if I was a temporary nuisance, some outsider invading her carefully controlled world. At first I ignored it, chalked it up to cultural differences, thinking it would fade with time. I had no idea I was planting seeds for storms that would hit years later. Our first few months together were like a carnival. Jennifer loved the little things I loved, obscure movies, midnight walks through the city, horror films that made my stomach twist in anticipation. She was carefree, almost chaotic, with an energy that filled every room. I adored her. We traveled together, visiting cities I had never seen before. New York in December, icy wind tearing at our faces, sipping hot chocolate on street corners. Nashville in spring, the streets filled with neon lights and country music that made us laugh until our sides ached. She was smart, ambitious, and college-bound, and I found myself helping her study late into the night, quizzing her on philosophy and literature, proudly watching her chase the education I had never had the chance to pursue. When we got serious, I didn't think much about the 5-year age gap, but it mattered, big time. She couldn't sit through a movie without scrolling her phone, commenting on trivial plot points, or reading Wikipedia summaries, and dismissing the story altogether. I joked about it at first, but inside it chipped away at the connection I thought was unbreakable. My humor, my pop culture references, my love for black metal and horror films, everything that made me who I was, started to feel like a wedge between us. I rationalized it. Maybe she just hadn't experienced these things the way I had. Maybe it was just a phase. And yet, I couldn't shake the little red flags, the tiny alarms going off in my brain whenever she got annoyed at me for joking, whenever she rolled her eyes at my music or laughed at my horror movie obsession. I ignored them, telling myself I loved her. Stupidly, I thought love would bridge every gap. I wasn't rich, I wasn't particularly well off, but I wanted to give her everything she deserved. When college expenses started piling up, I picked up extra work, juggling jobs until my body ached, all to make sure she could pursue her dreams without financial strain. I naively believed she would do the same for me someday. That belief, so blindly hopeful, would become a cornerstone of the betrayal I never saw coming. Her family's disapproval was constant. They accused me of brainwashing her, of taking her away from them, of destroying the careful control they had over her life. But she told me I was her safe haven, the person who made her feel free when the world seemed suffocating. Her mother's harsh discipline, her father's distant presence, it was a nightmare she confided in me about, and I felt proud, foolishly, that I was her knight. I was determined to protect her, to shield her from their judgment and cruelty. So I married her. I didn't want a marriage without commitment, without certainty. My grandparents had been married for over 60 years. I wanted that kind of bond, and I thought in some naive way that she did too. The wedding was modest, quiet, an oasis of joy amid the chaos of our lives. I remember the soft scent of her dress, the nervous tremble in her voice, the way she held my hand so tightly it left imprints. I thought I had made the right choice. I thought love could conquer anything. But marriage changed her, or maybe it revealed who she truly was. The music I loved became dangerous. Horror films, once a shared joy, became evidence of some dark intent in me. The bills, the financial pressure, the exhaustion. I should have seen the warning signs in how she reacted, how she withdrew, how her laughter became sarcasm, her warmth replaced with disdain. I was giving everything, sacrificing every piece of myself, and I barely realized it until years later. Even then, the worst was yet to come. The subtle red flags became glaring warnings I refused to see. The hints of secrets, the late nights, the mysterious friend from next door, everything built toward a moment so devastating that even thinking about it now makes my chest tighten. But I wasn't there yet. At this point I was still a man in love, still believing the fairy tale I had written in my head could be real. I guess what I'm trying to say is this: you don't see the betrayal coming. Not when you're so wrapped up in doing everything right, in loving with every piece of your heart. You see only the carnival, the excitement, the bright lights, and you ignore the cracks. That's where my story begins. I didn't know the moment would come. I thought the late nights, the sighs, the subtle withdrawal, those were just phases. Stress from college, work, life in general. I was wrong. That illusion shattered one night in November. The city streets outside were slick with rain, neon reflections dancing in the puddles like something out of a noir film. I had been working my third job that day, exhausted, hands raw from lifting boxes at the warehouse. I had barely eaten, barely slept, and I came home looking forward to a familiar smile, a warm meal, maybe some normalcy. But the apartment was quiet, too quiet. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her, running late. That wasn't unusual. College assignments, work, friends. But as the hours passed, unease settled like a stone in my stomach. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The city's hum outside seemed to mock me. Every text went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. My mind spun. Maybe she got stuck. Maybe the train. Maybe she forgot to charge her phone. Reasonable explanations. But the pit in my stomach grew, gnawing at me, growing teeth. By 2 a.m. I was pacing the apartment, checking the locks, staring at the windows. I tried to distract myself. Netflix, cleaning, anything. But the anxiety kept rising. Then I remembered she had mentioned Kevin, that co-worker who sometimes drove her home when she stayed late. I didn't panic yet. I told myself I trusted her, but there was a twinge of doubt I couldn't shake. I tried calling Kevin. His voicemail was disconnected. My heart started thudding in a way that felt like it could be heard outside, across the street, maybe across the city. At 5 a.m. my phone rang. I answered, voice hoarse, expecting an explanation. It was her. The sound of her voice, slurred, trembling, made my chest tight. She was at Kevin's apartment. She had been sick, drinking too much at a bar, and he had helped her. She sounded embarrassed, slightly guilty, but not terrified, not remorseful. She had been gone all night, left me in panic, and yet she spoke as if it were normal. The disbelief washed over me in waves. How could this be happening? I wanted to scream, cry, collapse. Instead I felt hollow. My body was there, but my mind had shut off in disbelief. The days that followed were a storm I couldn't weather. I confronted every question met with fury, excuses, deflection. He was just helping me, she said. You're overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. My instincts, my gut, they screamed otherwise. The betrayal was layered, nuanced, something you can feel in the marrow before it becomes visible. And then came the confession I didn't even know I was waiting for. It happened on a cold Tuesday evening. I remember because the wind whipped through the apartment windows, rattling the blinds. carrying the faint smell of burning leaves from the street below. I couldn't take the secrecy anymore. Every fiber of me ached for truth. I demanded it, my voice raw, trembling with a mixture of anger, heartbreak and disbelief. Are you seeing him? Her face went pale, the color draining like paint being washed away. And then she spoke words that will forever echo in my mind. Yes, I am. I want someone else. Someone who understands me. Someone like me. The betrayal hit like a freight train. The sense of disbelief, anger, and deep twisting sorrow coalesced into a single suffocating emotion. I felt everything at once: shock, humiliation, grief. My mind reeled. Almost a year of intimate moments, shared dreams, whispered plans about a future together. Everything tainted. Every laugh, every touch, every word exchanged now carried the weight of deceit. And the kicker, the reason, the justification was almost laughably absurd if it weren't so cruel. Someone like me, she said. She wanted someone from her culture, someone her family could approve of, someone who fit the mold she had been trying to escape by marrying. The world tilted, and I could barely comprehend her words. The very person I had sacrificed for, supported, defended, loved with a ferocity I hadn't known I possessed, had been planning this betrayal all along. In that moment I felt a mix of rage and numbness. My hands shook, my vision blurred. The room seemed too small, the walls pressing in on me. I wanted to hurt something, anything, to give physical form to the pain inside me, but I couldn't. I was raised to never hit a woman, never escalate. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I stepped back, drew a line and told her to leave. The next morning I walked through downtown Chicago, the streets empty and cold, the wind biting through my coat, trying to wrap my head around everything. My thoughts spun in loops. How could I have been so blind? Why didn't I see the signs? Every red flag I ignored, every subtle snub, every small betrayal I rationalized. It all converged into one devastating reality. My life, the life I had built and shared, had been a lie. I kept thinking about all the sacrifices I had made, the extra jobs, the sleepless nights, the financial support, the way I had given everything without expecting anything in return. And in return, I had been lied to, manipulated, and the weight of it crushed me, made me question not just my relationship but my judgment, my worth. I also thought about the man Kevin, a stranger who had been there all along, waiting, filling the gaps I thought were part of the natural ebb and flow of a relationship. He had been the other, the shadow behind every late night, every unexplained absence, and she had chosen him, chosen betrayal over the life we had planned, over the love I had offered freely. The breaking point wasn't a single act, it was the accumulation of months, of little cracks widening into chasms, the forgotten texts, the secret meetings, the change in intimacy, the withdrawal, the manipulation, the lies about her feelings, her ambitions, her intention. By the time she confessed, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was broken. But in that devastation, a flicker of clarity appeared. I realized that my life, my identity couldn't be defined by someone else's deception. I had been giving everything for a love that didn't exist, and now it was gone. I felt grief, yes, but also a strange, icy resolve forming inside me. The betrayal had been monumental, yes, but it also gave me the chance to reclaim myself, to take a step back from the nightmare I had been living. I remember the weeks after the confession as a blur. I moved through my days like a ghost. Work, sleep, eat, repeat. Everything reminded me of her, of what I had lost. But every night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I began to plan, not revenge, not malice, but reclaiming my life. Filing for divorce, removing her presence from my home, my finances, my plans. It became a mission, a lifeline. The betrayal had broken me, yes, but it also gave me purpose, a reason to survive and rebuild. And somewhere deep inside I knew this. That night, that confession, that breaking point, was not the end. It was the beginning of the next chapter, a chapter where I would eventually learn painfully how to love, how to trust again, and how to never allow someone to diminish me so completely. The days after her confession felt like walking through a city made of glass. Every step I took seemed to risk shattering my own world into tiny, irreparable pieces. November in Chicago was brutal. Gray skies, bitter winds cutting through layers of clothing, rain and sleet mingling on the sidewalks. I walked those streets endlessly, hands stuffed in pockets, head down, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep.
I couldn't focus. Everything reminded me of her. A street corner where we once shared coffee, the corner of my apartment where she used to laugh at my terrible jokes, even the faint scent of Thai food from downstairs. The memories hit me like punches I didn't see coming. The first few days were almost surreal. I went through the motions, worked my odd jobs, answered emails, collected packages, managed deliveries, but it all felt like a haze, a robotic existence I had been forced into. My colleagues noticed. I smiled at them, joked in that familiar sarcastic way I always did, but it felt hollow. Every laugh was a mask, hiding the raw, jagged ache inside me. I had trusted her with my heart, my life, my finances, my future, and she had torn it all apart. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it left me questioning everything about myself, my judgment, my worth, my ability to read people. Her absence was a constant echo. I kept expecting her to appear at the apartment door, to laugh and apologize, to explain away the gaps in her story, but she didn't. The silence was deafening. The trust that had taken years to build evaporated overnight, leaving behind a void that no amount of distraction could fill. I started noticing patterns I had ignored for so long: the late texts, the defensive reactions, the withdrawal from intimacy, the subtle manipulations disguised as jokes or quirks. They weren't quirks, they were warnings I had ignored, little alarms in the chaos of infatuation and love. Friends were another challenge. I had moved thousands of miles from my hometown. I didn't have a support network nearby, no family to lean on, no childhood friends to vent to over beers or late-night drives. Calling home wasn't the same. They were hundreds of miles away, hearing only fragments of my pain through a phone line. I started attending therapy on my own, first out of necessity, then out of a need to understand how someone could betray so completely. Sitting in a sterile office, the faint smell of coffee and disinfectant lingering, I recounted my story to a stranger, a professional who listened, nodded, and occasionally asked questions. But even with guidance, the sense of loss was suffocating. Financial fallout added another layer. I had taken on multiple jobs to support her, and now the reality of that sacrifice pressed down like a physical weight. I had saved nothing for myself, lived month to month, and every extra dollar I had invested in her education, her comfort, her well-being felt like it had been stolen. I learned that she had been using my generosity strategically, manipulating my goodwill to create a safety net for herself, while she pursued a life that excluded me. The realization made my stomach churn. I had been a fool, blinded by love, and now I was left to pick up the pieces alone. The emotional strain seeped into my body in ways I hadn't anticipated. Nights were the worst, lying awake in a bed that had once been ours, feeling the hollow absence beside me. My mind would spiral, replaying moments, second-guessing my decisions, imagining conversations that might have gone differently. I found myself awake until the early hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words, her confession, the sheer audacity of it. My chest would tighten, my hands would shake, and I'd feel tears rolling down my cheeks, despite my best efforts to hold them back. I hated crying, hated feeling weak, but I couldn't stop it. Grief has a way of bending the strongest parts of you until they break. Every corner of my apartment became a reminder: the horror movie posters I had to sell to keep the peace, the music CDs I once loved, but had stashed away, the sketchbooks and notes she had left behind. They were all evidence of a life that had been hijacked by deception. I would pick them up, stare at them, and feel a strange mix of nostalgia and rage. The same city that had once felt like a playground, now felt like a labyrinth of betrayal, trapping me in memories I couldn't escape. Even mundane tasks became trial. Cooking felt pointless without someone to share the meal. Laundry piled up because every shirt, every pair of jeans, carried the scent of memories I didn't want to remember. Driving became a meditation in despair, every red light a moment to contemplate the absurdity of how love could be so violently upended. I'd find myself staring out at the rain-soaked streets, wondering how someone I had trusted so completely could have led a double life for nearly a year. Isolation became both a curse and a shield. I avoided new relationships, afraid of opening myself up again. I withdrew socially, skipping invitations, avoiding small talk, focusing solely on work and survival. My identity had been entwined with hers, and without her I felt unmoored. I questioned everything about myself, my judgment, my ability to trust, my worthiness of love. The phrase gaslighting had recently entered my lexicon, and I spent hours dissecting every interaction, every conversation, Every moment that now, in hindsight, seemed like manipulation. I realized I had been conditioned to prioritize her comfort over my own sanity, to suppress my needs, and in doing so I had allowed myself to be used. Yet amidst the despair, moments of clarity began to emerge. Therapy sessions helped me articulate feelings I couldn't otherwise express. I started journaling, pouring every ounce of frustration, grief and anger onto the page. I wrote letters I would never send, imagining confronting her, imagining reclaiming every lost moment. Slowly I began to understand that the betrayal, while devastating, didn't define me. My response to it could, and so I started planning, not revenge, not petty gains, but a path forward, a reclamation of my life. Divorce became an inevitability. Filing the paperwork felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying, liberating. The legal process was a blur of appointments, signatures, and staring at forms that once seemed meaningless. I met the judge. Ironically, her name was Jennifer, and I felt a strange sense of poetic justice. Within a month, the legal ties were severed. The apartment, the finances, the shared life, all of it cut away like diseased tissue. I was free, and yet the freedom was tinged with an ache that no legal document could erase. Friends and family, who eventually learned fragments of the story, offered support, but it was limited by distance and understanding. Most couldn't fully grasp the depth of emotional labor, the insidiousness of betrayal hidden behind smiles and reassurance. I learned to be my own anchor, to trust my instincts again, and to rebuild a sense of self that had been eroded over years. Looking back, the fallout was not just about the end of a relationship, it was about the unlearning of self-deception, the painful recognition of my own boundaries, and the brutal necessity of asserting them. I had loved blindly, sacrificed wildly, and in return I had been deceived. But from that devastation came the first stirrings of resilience. I spent months navigating the labyrinth of grief and anger, balancing between despair and determination. I reconnected with my passions, the music I loved, the horror films I had sold and longed to collect again, the small pleasures of life I had neglected. Slowly I started to reclaim pieces of myself I had buried under the weight of her manipulation. I realized that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about actively reconstructing a life that honored my own desires, my own boundaries, and my own worth. And so the fallout became my foundation. From the rubble of betrayal I began to rebuild, brick by brick, until I could breathe again without the suffocating weight of lies pressing on my chest. I learned that heartbreak isn't just a moment, it's a process, a series of confrontations with reality, with oneself, and with the limitations of trust. And I learned, painfully, that some people are incapable of the love they claim to offer. But the world doesn't end when they fail you, you just learn how to live without them.
After the storm of betrayal and the numb haze of fallout, I realized that staying stuck in the wreckage wasn't going to rebuild anything. The initial shock had worn off, leaving behind a quiet, simmering rage and a strange clarity. I had been blind, yes, but I could no longer afford to be naive. This wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about survival, self-respect, and reclaiming the life that had been hijacked. The first step was taking control of my environment. The apartment, once a shared space, had become a gallery of memories that hurt too much. I started systematically reclaiming it. I boxed up everything that belonged to her, gifts, clothes, personal items, and stored them away, either to be returned, donated, or discarded. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. Each item I removed felt like I was cutting a tether to the past, severing the threads that had been used to manipulate me. I cleaned obsessively, the scrubbing and organizing becoming a ritual of control and healing. Financial independence became another priority. I had spent years supporting her education, paying bills, covering groceries, taking on extra work, and now, I realized how much of my life had been consumed by that role. I created a strict budget, separated my accounts, and took control of every dollar that flowed in and out. Every paycheck became a symbol of my autonomy. No longer was I giving blindly, hoping for love in return. I was investing in myself, my future, and my dignity. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. Therapy played a massive role in this phase. I had started initially to process the shock, but now I used it as a tool for empowerment. I dug into patterns of manipulation I hadn't recognized before, dissected the gaslighting, the subtle emotional abuse, and my own tendencies to suppress my needs for someone else's comfort. I journaled extensively, sometimes late into the night, the words on the page spilling out raw and unfiltered, anger, sorrow, shame, and even glimpses of hope, all intertwined, forming a tapestry of self-understanding. I also started to redefine boundaries. For years I had compromised on everything: my hobbies, my passions, my friendships, my voice. Now I was learning the power of saying no, asserting my needs, and refusing to tolerate disrespect. This wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and the guilt of selfishness crept in whenever I prioritized myself. But I reminded myself that self-preservation wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Every small act, refusing extra shifts, declining unnecessary obligations, prioritizing sleep and mental health, felt like reclaiming territory I had lost. Socially, I began to re-emerge cautiously. I reached out to a few old friends I had neglected, rekindled connections I had left dormant, and allowed myself to form new friendships. At first the fear of betrayal lingered. I wondered if anyone would ever understand the depth of what I had endured. But slowly, with each genuine conversation, each shared laugh, the walls around me softened. Trust wasn't instant, but it became possible again. I realized that isolation had been a shield and a prison, necessary at first, but ultimately unsustainable. One of the most profound steps I took was reconnecting with my passions: the music I loved, the horror films I had sold, the obscure movies I had memorized. These were no longer just hobbies, they were anchors, reminders of the person I was before betrayal tried to rewrite me. I started rebuilding my collection slowly, hunting down rare CDs, finding digital copies of films, immersing myself in the things that brought me joy. It was almost ritualistic, almost spiritual. Each addition to my collection was a statement: I still existed, I still mattered. And then finally came the moment of empowerment, in the literal sense: legal and financial closure. Filing for divorce had been procedural, but it symbolized something far larger. I met with the lawyer, signed the papers, and waited for the court date. Sitting in that sterile courtroom, the weight of months of manipulation and betrayal pressing down, I felt a surge of vindication, not for revenge, but for survival. When the judge, ironically also named Jennifer, signed off on the divorce, I felt a mix of relief, sorrow, and a strange euphoria. The legal ties were severed. The nightmare was officially over. The psychological liberation was just as important. For years I had carried the burden of guilt. Guilt for questioning her, guilt for demanding fairness, guilt for wanting intimacy, for wanting love, for expecting honesty. That guilt evaporated as I reclaimed my autonomy. I realized that I had been nothing but kind, patient, and generous, and that generosity had been weaponized against me. Now I could own that kindness without shame. I could be compassionate, but I could also be cautious. I could trust again, but not blindly. I also confronted the idea of closure. She had attempted to control, manipulate, and gaslight, but I refused to let her have the last word in my story. I wrote letters I never sent, detailing every betrayal, every manipulation, every emotional wound, not as a way to lash out, but to externalize the pain and reclaim narrative control. It was my story now, and I would write it on my terms. Romance seemed impossible at first. I avoided dating for nearly 2 years, focusing entirely on personal growth. Nights were spent with books, music, and the occasional horror marathon. Social interactions were cautious, measured, and controlled, but gradually I allowed myself to feel again. Small sparks of interest, subtle connections, and genuine friendships laid the groundwork for trust. I learned to distinguish between genuine affection and manipulation, between interest and obligation. And then finally she arrived, my current partner. She came into my life when I was 40, a woman who had endured her own share of heartbreak and betrayal. She understood the scars I carried because she bore her own. Together we built a foundation on communication, honesty, and shared joy. She laughed at my obscure movie references, celebrated my obsession with horror films, and even helped me track down some of the rare collections I had lost. Intimacy returned, not just physical, but emotional. We danced in grocery stores, made absurd noises to find each other in crowds, and allowed ourselves to be unabashedly goofy together. Through her I realized that healing isn't linear. It's messy, it's painful, it's full of setbacks, but it's also possible. I could trust again.
I could love again. I could find joy in the little things without fear of betrayal lurking in the shadows, and most importantly, I could forgive, not her, not the betrayal but myself, for the mistakes I made in ignorance, for the blind trust, for the misplaced sacrifices. Turning the tables wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. It was about saying to myself, you deserve better, you are worthy, you are enough. Every step I took, cleaning my space, reclaiming my finances, pursuing my passions, seeking therapy, forming healthy relationships, was a small victory, a brick in the foundation of a life rebuilt from the ruins of deceit. And so the monumental dumpster fire that had once consumed me became fuel, fuel for self-discovery, fuel for resilience, fuel for love built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. I realized that betrayal, as devastating as it is, can also illuminate your own strength, reveal the depth of your capacity for empathy, and teach lessons that no amount of happiness ever could. By the time I felt ready to date again, I was not the naive 25-year-old who had fallen so complete. I was a man who had faced betrayal, survived it, and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. I had learned to recognize red flags, to set boundaries, to value my own needs, and to trust my instinct. I had learned that love is not about sacrifice to the point of self-erasure, but about mutual respect, shared joy and open communication. And in the end, turning the tables wasn't about punishing her, it was about reclaiming myself. It was about rebuilding a life where I am the protagonist, not a pawn. Every day since has been a testament to that reclamation, a quiet celebration of resilience, and a commitment to never allow anyone to diminish my worth again. It's strange how life can feel like a pendulum swinging from the depths of despair to moments of pure, unexpected joy. When I think back on everything, the manipulation, the lies, the heartbreak, I realize that those experiences, as devastating as they were, shaped me in ways nothing else could. The betrayal that had once shattered me became a lens through which I began to see the world, and myself, more clearly. By the time I met her, the woman I am with now, I had spent years rebuilding, reflecting, and reclaiming pieces of my identity I hadn't even realized I had lost. I was cautious at first, naturally. After everything, trust didn't come easy, but she was different. She had endured her own hardships, recognized the shadows of past relationships, and valued honesty and communication above all else. It wasn't instant chemistry alone that drew me to her, it was the shared understanding of pain, the mutual respect for boundaries, and the unspoken recognition that neither of us would repeat the mistakes of the past. We took things slow. Dates weren't just dinners or movies, they were exercises in patience, observation and genuine connection. I shared parts of my past I had once buried, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the feeling of being gaslit and used. She listened, not to judge, but to understand, to see the man behind the scars, and in listening, she allowed me to process what had once seemed unbearable. Slowly I learned that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Rebuilding intimacy was another journey entirely. For years physical affection had been a battlefield, a source of conflict and resentment. With her, intimacy returned naturally, without expectation or pressure. We laughed together, joked about our quirks, celebrated small victories, and shared comfort in ways I had longed for but never truly experienced before. Horror movies became our shared obsession again. Music filled the apartment like it had once done in happier times, a soundtrack to a life rebuilt. And yes, we even danced in grocery stores, made ridiculous noises to find each other in crowds, and embraced the absurdity of life without shame. These weren't just moments of joy, they were declarations of resilience, proof that life could be reclaimed and rewritten on your terms. Even with all this, the past never fully disappears. Memories of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak still flicker occasionally, like shadows at the edge of a room. Sometimes a street corner, a song, or a smell will trigger a flashback, a pang of disbelief that this ever happened to me. But the difference now is perspective. The pain no longer dominates, it informs. I can acknowledge it without letting it define me. I can remember the hurt and recognize how far I've come, and in doing so I've learned a profound truth. Trauma doesn't have to be a prison, it can be a teacher. I also learned the power of boundaries and self-respect. In my previous relationship, I had bent and broken myself repeatedly to accommodate someone else's desires and insecurities. In doing so, I had lost sight of my own needs, my own identity. With my current partner, that pattern doesn't exist. Communication is constant and honest. We check in with each other about feelings, expectations, and boundaries. We listen actively, negotiate compromises, and make decisions together. There's no fear of manipulation, no games, no gaslighting, just mutual respect and understanding. Financial independence and personal growth also played a crucial role in my sense of resolution. The lessons learned from being used and betrayed are ones I carry every day. I manage my finances carefully, invest in my passions, and ensure that I never place myself in a position where my generosity can be exploited again. At the same time, I've learned that generosity is not a weakness. It's only when generosity is met with deceit that it becomes dangerous. I've learned to give wisely, to trust carefully, and to value my own contributions as much as I value those of others. One of the most profound realizations I've had is that finding your person often requires walking through a monumental dumpster fire. The betrayal, heartbreak, and suffering weren't just random misfortune. They were experiences that prepared me for a relationship built on authenticity, trust, and shared joy. In surviving, I became more resilient, more empathetic, and more capable of deep, meaningful connection. What once seemed like insurmountable pain became the foundation upon which I built a healthier, happier life. I also discovered the importance of gratitude, not in the naive sense of everything happens for a reason, but in the conscious acknowledgement of survival and growth. I am grateful for my resilience, for the lessons learned, for the ability to recognize toxic patterns and avoid repeating them. I am grateful for my current partner, whose presence transforms ordinary moments into laughter-filled memories. And I am grateful for the clarity that comes from having seen the worst humanity can offer, and choosing not to let it define my future. Life, I've realized, is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but it's also profoundly beautiful. I have learned to embrace imperfection, to find joy in small victories, and to cultivate love and connection deliberately, rather than assuming they will simply appear. I've learned that power doesn't come from controlling others, it comes from controlling your response, reclaiming your agency, and refusing to let betrayal dictate your worth. Looking back, I am struck by the irony of it all. The woman who betrayed me, who once seemed like the center of my universe, is now a distant memory, a cautionary tale rather than a present threat. And the man I am today, shaped by that experience, is stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than the one who naively trusted. I carry scars, yes, but they are badges of survival, reminders of my capacity to endure and rebuild. Ultimately, the resolution isn't about revenge, closure, or retribution. It's about life regained. It's about waking up in the morning without a weight pressing on your chest, about sharing laughter freely, about pursuing passions unapologetically. It's about love that is chosen, not manipulated, respect that is mutual, not coerced, and intimacy that is shared, not demanded. I've built a life that honors my past, celebrates my present, and protects my future. And for the first time in years, I feel truly, profoundly free. Sometimes I think about the twists and turns of life, about the people who shape us in ways we never anticipated. The betrayal I endured was monstrous, devastating, and unforgettable, but it also led me to clarity, resilience, and a love that is real, reciprocal, and enduring. I survived, I healed, and I rebuilt. I discovered that heartbreak is not the end of the story. It's merely a chapter, one that can set the stage for a life far richer than I could have imagined. And so, when I look at the world now, I see opportunity rather than threat. I see connection rather than isolation. I see joy rather than despair. I have learned that you can endure unimaginable pain and still emerge not just intact but stronger, wiser, and capable of genuine, lasting happiness. Life is messy, people are flawed, and betrayal exists, but so do resilience, love, and the power to reclaim your story. Sometimes to find your person, you have to walk through fire. Sometimes that fire is a monumental dumpster fire, one that consumes everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and safety. And sometimes on the other side of that fire you discover something extraordinary, yourself, whole and unbroken, ready to embrace a life built not on deception, but on honesty, joy, and true connection. And that in the end is the resolution. The fire didn't destroy me, it forged